Before we begin, this video is sponsored by ExpressVPN. If you've been watching my videos long enough, you'll know that the internet is a truly terrifying place, and if it isn't internet ghosts or sentient technology looking to take over the world, it's some criminal, government, or corporate douchebag looking to compromise your privacy, harvest your personal data, and sell it for profit, which is actually what your US internet service provider can and likely will do. That's why you should join me in using ExpressVPN. All I do is download the app for my computer, tablet, phone, or whatever device I happen to use, click a big button, and bam! Now my IP address is masked and my data is encrypted, allowing me to browse, upload, and download securely and anonymously with faster speeds than any other VPN provider. And most of all, ExpressVPN's trusted server technology completely wipes all information without fear of it being stored on some hard drive or server that could later be intruded. However, it has an even more exotic purpose, where it allows you to access films and other content locked outside your country on platforms such as Netflix, Prime, Disney+, and even here on YouTube. Like, I just want to watch John Oliver. Is that really too much to ask? For example, at the time of recording, Snakes on a Plane is not available on the US Netflix server, but it is currently available on the UK one. So if you're in the US, you simply select a UK location, click connect, and now you can enjoy watching Samuel L. Jackson fighting snakes in all its glorious schlock. So with fast speeds, top ratings, easy use, and 24/7 customer support to keep you happy, find out how you can get 3 months free by visiting expressvpn.com/Ryan, and hey, why not use it to help out the channel as well? Hey, just for clarity, for the purposes of this setup, I'm going to remake a section from an old video of mine with my older, jaded, cynical tone of voice because it would be less contrived than for me to just rewrite my own words completely, so let's begin. Our story begins back in the simpler times of Wednesday the 17th of August 2005. Screenwriter Josh Friedman had just published an enthusiastic blog post about a time when he was nearly hired to script doctor a film he described as having the everlasting gobstopper of movie titles. He felt ecstatic and inspired and was ready to give this work of genius his all, knowing that its title alone would be enough to capture the giddy attention of the masses. However, unfortunately for Friedman, the expected happened. Once he was on the phone with producers, they had decided to change the title into something that would reflect their shift in direction towards a supposedly more marketable horror thriller, resulting in Friedman losing the gig after he disputed the per decision and openly criticized the project. New Line Cinema were ready to give the world a film with the elegantly provocative and not at all jarring title Pacific Air Flight 121. At least until the film's star, Samuel L. Jackson, came along publicly and demanded they revert it back to the original campy B-movie title, Snakes on a Plane! As Friedman had predicted, the title Snakes on a Plane was enough to generate an enormous amount of hype across many social circles, resulting in the film becoming the hottest, tastiest meme across the internet prior to its release in August 2006. It was perfectly in the right place at the right time. Songs, clothing, fan art, fanfiction, competitions, party trailers, films, and animations bombarded sharing platforms like the once popular Newgrounds and a quirky little startup called YouTube, back when it favoured short-form content. While social media as we know it today was still in its relative infancy outside of MySpace, with Facebook just beginning its ascent into dominance and Twitter having just launched as the hype reached its peak, that wasn't enough to stop this viral sensation from making its way into the mainstream media, with many news outlets covering the story as this rare phenomenon that was compared with the hype surrounding the Blair Witch Project. As such, it was confidently predicted that Snakes on a Plane would make back almost its entire $33 million budget in its opening weekend, although while it did secure the #1 spot, it only made half of what it was predicted, eventually falling further to barely making twice its original budget overall, and quickly and quietly slithered into obscurity. New Line Cinema were severely disappointed in the film's performance, and it brought the relationship between hype and expectations into question, with my original assessment of its failure to translate hype into sales simply being that the internet got obsessed with the title, and like every other trend, eventually they just got bored of it. However, upon recently watching the film on Netflix for the first time since I saw it on DVD nearly 15 years ago, and looking further into the film's history, I want to reevaluate my opinion on its failure, because not only did the internet have a more drastic influence than I realized, but it is so much more darker than I remember that, come on, of course we have to talk about it. Snakes on a Plane is one of those films where almost everyone has heard of it, yet surprisingly so little have actually seen it. Its concept was credited to Pittsburgh University administrator David D'Alessandro, who after reading about Indonesian brown tree snakes sneaking onto cargo planes during World War II, wrote an original screenplay in 1992 entitled Venom, and developed it over several years while pitching it to multiple studios before it eventually landed in the hands of New Line Cinema in 2004, who subsequently rewrote the entire film. Considering how it relied on a single gimmick, it is remarkable that it did not turn out to be a complete cinematic disaster, if indeed there are many who probably would call it a disappointing missed opportunity. Directed by the late David R. Ellis, Snakes on a Plane was a much more serious action thriller than many people anticipated, as New Line Cinema ultimately followed through with their intent of making it closer to a horror flick than a campy B-movie, which they felt would be alienating. Yet, thankfully, Ellis showed enough self-awareness to not overlook the fact that its basic premise of snakes attacking people on a plane was the only reason anyone wanted to see it, as well as the sole reason Samuel L. Jackson even signed on to begin with. As such, it does deliver on the premise of an old-school creature feature that's littered with just enough crassness, ludicrousy, and tongue-in-cheek humor to tick the right boxes, but it's also an unexpectedly violent film where you don't have to be scared of snakes to be repulsed at some of its stunningly grisly deaths. I actually think that's why I appreciated the film a lot more than I expected during my rewatch. Unlike later creature flicks like Sharknado for example, it doesn't just go for glory over-the-top kills that look stupid and make you feel numb by the end. Instead, it really plays up the phobia of a snake attack with shivering body horror sequences like when a child has venom sucked out of his arm, or when this cute, adorable, loving couple get absolutely fucking battered by several snakes at once, and let's not begin to even talk about the dog. Look, I'm not going to get into the science of how snake attacks actually work, but what I do know is that they're not pleasant, and this film explicitly makes a point to not sanitize that aspect, even if it is still a far-fetched Hollywood spectacle. As a result, the film's graphic nature isn't something that many were expecting from a concept as dumb as this one, meaning that the producers obviously misjudged what they felt would make it so alienating. It's a fun film, sure, but lacks comedic sensibilities or a tameness that would make it accessible to broader audiences. That latter criticism was considered by several critics as a pivotal point to its failure. Many reports at the time highlighted that the film was pushed from a PG-13 to an R rating after producers shot additional scenes to include nudity and drug use to bring the film closer to the internet's supposed expectations. Now, of course, internet fans encouraging producers to push for R ratings isn't anything new. For example, after Fox botched Deadpool in X-Men Origins, Ryan Reynolds made a massive song and dance about an R-rated Deadpool movie, and they eventually got their wish. But here, it just seemed to be that producers fundamentally misunderstood how many people actually seriously cared about the film. Although with that said, I kinda think the film would not have the same bite or trashy charm without that additional maturity, shall we say, especially since without it, we would not have Samuel L. Jackson's iconic line in all its glorious vulgarity.
I have had it with these motherfucking giant snakes on this motherfucking plane. Everybody strap in. I'm about to open some fucking windows.
Okay, so I know it sounds crass, but the film's blatant attempt to be edgy is honestly one of its charms, because when it comes to the violence, it allows the film to create some sense of believability. While it is still pure escapism at heart, the film makes effective use of its limited claustrophobic setting to do some real situational horror, like someone being stampeded to death, or falling onto debris, or being exposed while you're at your most vulnerable like in a public restroom. It builds all these real human phobias and anxieties on top of each other to find that fear that makes you tick, which is exactly what Ellis did so well in one of his prior films, Final Destination 2, where it takes the far-fetched concept of death finding a way to kill people and makes you buy into it by making the deaths feel both realistic and equally gratifying. Now, for the record, I'm not saying the film is perfect. It's severely overbloated with jokes and ironies that fall flat, and a runtime that overstays its welcome, but I think what keeps a large part of the film together is that it doesn't solely rely on the gimmick of having Sam Jackson fighting snakes. It has a solid enough cast of characters that feel distinct enough that they aren't just red shirts you're expecting to be killed off at some point. I won't go through them all individually because I really don't have much to say about any of them, but if there's one film that constantly kept coming to mind while watching it, it's the 90s action thriller Speed. Let me explain. Basically, the characters aren't written to be deep or complex. They're meant to simply embody everyday people you and I can relate to. You have your awkward types, your friendly, helpful types, the douchebags, and those who are just innocently naive.
Coach? Is it safe there?
Yes, it is safe there.
But what it does is adds a human cost to the situation. Sure, you have your nameless cannon fodder, but there is still a real sense of danger because the ensemble doesn't have strict plot armor, and it stops the film from exhausting the use of Samuel L. Jackson, who surprisingly puts away his Pulp Fiction-esque scene-chewing performance style in favor of playing the straight man who lives up to his own hype. This is pretty much the exact same conditions as Speed, and the film even has its own ground level support team led by Bobby Cannavale, who plays a very similar character to Jeff Daniels, and then of course you have Kenan Thompson eventually putting his flying simulator skills to use to help land the plane after a brief confidence boost, again, very similar to Sandra Bullock having to drive the bus in Speed. Since the cast grow a tangible camaraderie as things worsen, it makes their eventual victory even more satisfying, empowering, and relieving, overturning feelings we might have about the initially douchier characters. A lot of this dynamic is reinforced by a social divide established amongst the passengers, where the richer characters show outward frustration and even disgust at the mere idea of sitting in economy class due to the FBI commandeering first class. It eventually reaches a tipping point where the germaphobe rap artist 3Gs lashes out with his arrogance and entitlement before his childhood best friend and bodyguard Troy, played by Kenan Thompson, steps in to humble him and reminds him that his status means absolutely nothing in a life or death situation where everyone is equally in this together. Again, reminds me of Alan Ruck's character in Speed. All I'm saying is Speed is great, you should totally go watch Speed, but before you ask, no, there isn't a sequel. Look, I'm not saying the film has a thematic angle to it, it just uses the social dynamic to put the situation into perspective to reinforce the growing unity of the characters. Anyway, before we end, I should expand on the elaborate catalyst for the plot because it's probably the thing that caught me off guard the most. The reason the snakes are on the plane to begin with is because a Hawaiian gang boss called Eddie Kim wants to kill a murder witness called Sean who is being transported to LA to testify against him. In order to make it look like an accident, a very bizarre accident, he hires an illegal snake handler to smuggle 30 different species of snakes onto the plane and spray the leads given to each of the passengers with a pheromone that makes them aggressive. That's pretty much about it. If anything, it's actually more complicated than it needed to be, but at least it adds a bit of urgency to where Samuel L. Jackson's Agent Flynn needs to keep Sean alive, but it forgets to ever play up this dynamic with any sort of tension. I suppose that's ultimately the main problem with the film. It's inconsistent about where its attention needs to be, that a lot of scenes don't feel as meaningful as they should be, resulting in a few scenarios that pad out the runtime in uninteresting ways. I think the one fourth wall breaking joke that made me legitimately laugh out loud was when a guy puts a snake in a microwave and one of the buttons says snake on it. It's small quirks like that that made me wish the film had more fun with its premise, because it plays it way too straight for the most part. And those are my thoughts on Snakes on a Plane. It's admirable to think that it doesn't fall as flat as it could have, considering the producer's ill-judged efforts to make this a serious thriller. It benefits from a director who knew how to heighten realism without crossing the line into nonsensical overload, which is actually something that only started to gain better critical approval with the escalating Fast and Furious and Mission Impossible sequels. If you think there is a film like Snakes on a Plane that deserves a re-evaluation or just more love, let me know about it in the comments below. And until next time, stay safe, stay away from pheromone sprayed leaves, and I'll see you all next time.